What's up, casual builders? Tim here, and in this video, I'll be building a lumber storage cart. It's got some cubbies on the front, it's got some shelving in the middle, and some angled slats on the back to hold plywood and some other sheet goods. It's compact, it's on wheels, and it's perfect for any smaller shop. So if you're looking to build something similar, stick around and I'll show you how to do it. So if you've been following my channel for a little bit now, you might have noticed that I've been posting videos more frequently these days, and I have a reason for that. Long story short, I got laid off from my full-time job. It's good though, because it's given me an opportunity to spend a little bit more time doing this, making fun woodworking and DIY videos. But as it stands, I'm not at a place where I can make this my full-time job just yet, because if I struggle to gain some traction with this channel, I'll have to go back to looking for another opportunity that will help me pay the bills. But if you're thinking, oh, Tim, we love your videos, keep it up, you can help. All you got to do is hit that like button, leave a comment. Those little things help a ton with YouTube pushing my content out to other people. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what I've been doing here so far. So using 3 total 2x4s, I'm cutting them up at the miter saw into smaller pieces. 2 pieces that are 60 inches long and 3 of them around 18 inches or so. These will make up the frame, the platform that everything will sit on top of. Once those were cut, I grabbed my pocket hole jig and drilled out some pocket holes on both ends of those shorter pieces. These boards were a little funky, so I used some clamps and a mallet to line everything up, and then I drilled in some 2.5-inch screws to hold everything together. Oh, and I'm not using any glue with this project because with most shop furniture that I make, I'm sure I'll break it down in a few years when things change. With the frame built, the next thing to do is cut the plywood top to size. I'm using 1/2-inch CDX for this. CDX isn't anything fancy. I'm pretty sure it's just used as subflooring or exterior walls or on roofs. But where I live, it's hard to get the nice plywood. So it's like $160 for anything better, whereas CDX is like $40 to $50 a sheet. And instead of measuring out all my cuts with a tape measure, I decided to just use the frame we just built as reference. So I dropped it on the plywood, made a mark, and then cut it to length with my track saw. And you can easily use a circular saw for that as well. And then I took the frame, brought it back up on my table saw, adjusted the fence, and then made the final cut. If all works out well, the top should match the frame perfectly, and then I can pre-drill, countersink, and drive in some 1.5-inch screws to secure the top into place. So I live in a really small mountain town in Colorado, and there's like 2 places that sell casters, and I went to both of them. The basic ones that I wanted are around $16 per caster, and as much as I wanted to buy them there and support the businesses in our town, you just can't beat Amazon's pricing. I picked up a 4-pack for around $25, and these ones came with the screws and the washers that I needed to attach them. I'll leave a link down below in the video description if you want to check them out as well. I'm going to put the frame off to the side for a minute and grab this sheet of 3/4-inch plywood. Again, this is CDX, and the first cut that I'm making is with my track saw. This will be the middle dividing wall. Right now, I'm focusing on the side of the lumber cart that has all of the cubbies. On one half of this wall, there will be 2 stories of cubbies for smaller offcuts because that's typically what I have the most of. And then the other half of the side of the wall will have cubbies as well, but at the ground level for those longer offcuts. And this will all make sense in a minute when I lay out all of the pieces on the ground. I'm kind of doing things out of order here because I'm not following a specific set of plans. I do have a 3D model of this thing and a rough cut list, but the plans I made for this cart were built after this was made. So I could be more efficient with documenting the best way to go about doing this. I'm not sure about you guys, but whenever I measure something with a tape measure and then I set my fence on the table saw based on that measurement, it's always like slightly off. So instead, whenever possible, I try to grab pieces that I've already cut and then use those to set the fence. It seems to be much more accurate for me. Also, this cart can be built from 3 2x4s, 1 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood, and 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood. I messed up a few times with my cuts and I needed to use some scraps, but I've got a detailed cut list in my plans that will show you the best way to optimize your materials for this project. And right now I'm setting all the pieces down on the middle divider to mark out the locations for where I'll be drilling the pocket holes. And before I do that, I used my jigsaw to cut the dado, the groove. Basically, it's just cutting out a little notch on the 2 sides for the lower front panel of the cubbies. Next, I picked up that middle divider piece and threw it on my workbench to drill some more pocket holes on the bottom. And since this piece is fairly large, I brought out my smaller Kreg jig. This thing is awesome since you're able to bring the jig to the piece rather than the pieces to the jig. It comes in handy from time to time. And now it's time to start assembling everything. So this process is pretty straightforward, but I thought I'd share a few things that I learned while doing this. The first thing, use some clamps with those 2 longer side pieces. 90-degree clamps to keep them square, and maybe a parallel clamp to remove any bowing in the plywood like I had. Also, they really help to keep things secure when driving in the pocket screws, since they tend to shift the pieces a little bit. And next, use a spacer block when you can for positioning things. So you can either use the pieces that you've already cut, or grab some offcuts and then cut them down to the spacing that you need. And then finally, use a speed square along the way just to make sure that everything is lined up properly and everything is square and 90 degrees as well. Oh, and I'm also using 1.25" screws for everything here, except when you're only screwing into the 1/2 inch plywood base. I use inch-long screws for that, just so it wouldn't pop through the other side. And right here, I accidentally cut this front piece to match the width of the lower one, but it's actually 3/4 of an inch wider to account for the bottom. So I had to quickly fix that mistake. And that's it for this side, really. So I picked it up and I put it on the platform and screwed it into place. Alright, it's time to work on the other side of this cart. I started off by ripping down some 3/4 inch plywood for the middle shelves and the angled slats. For the shelves, I cut them a little wider than they needed to be because we'll grab the exact dimensions a little later when the slats are in place. Also, as I mentioned, these slats, the things that I'll be resting my sheet goods up against, will be sitting at a 3-degree angle. So using my digital angle reading thing, I tilted the blade on my table saw to 87 degrees and then cut the piece for the top shelf. I made some marks for where I wanted to drill some pocket holes. I drilled those pocket holes, and then I attached it to the top of the middle divider using clamps to keep it in place. With the table saw blade still set to 87 degrees, I cut one of the ends of each slat. I didn't worry too much about the length of these pieces, I just made sure that they were longer than I needed them to be because we can trim them down later on. And then back to the Kreg jig to drill some pocket holes at the angled ends of these pieces. And quick tip here, position these slats where you want them to be, grab some sort of offcut that's roughly the same length as the cart, put it at the base, clamp it down, and then drive some screws to secure the slats. This way, they're all sitting at the same angle. And then finally, secure the tops of these slats to the shelf we just installed with some brad nails or screws. They both work just fine. So as I was doing this, I realized that that little bracer piece right there that I was using to keep the slats in place was actually the exact width and length of the front lip that I needed to install. This piece basically stops any of the sheet goods from sliding off the platform. So I picked it up, I drilled some more pocket holes and installed it. In my plans, I say to screw this to the front of the platform instead of the top of the platform. And I'd recommend doing that because it'll give you a little bit more space, 3/4 of an inch more space to be exact. And then I grabbed my oscillating multi-tool to trim the tops of the angled slats. All right, so back to those middle shelves. So each of these shelves will have a different width because of that angled slat. And instead of cutting them exactly to what my 3D model said, I grabbed the measurements from the piece itself. I cut 2 spacers about 10 inches wide or so, and then clamped them into place on each side. And then I measured the distance from the bottom of that spacer to the slat, and then I took the shelf back to the table saw, ripped it down to that exact measurement. And then the same process as that top shelf, I drilled out some pocket holes, I secured it in place with some clamps while using a speed square to make sure that it was angled properly. I drove in some pocket screws, and then I screwed the slat into the side of the shelves. And then I repeated that same process for basically all the shelves. And guys, that's really it. Since I was using this crappy CDX stuff, I gave it a quick sand to soften up those sharp edges and just make it look a little bit nicer. And the only thing left to do was clean up my messy scrapwood pile, put this thing in place, and load it up. And to quickly summarize what I said at the start, I lost my job. I'm trying YouTube full time for a little bit now. So if you like this video, it'd mean the world to me if you could just hit that like button and subscribe if you're not already. And also let me know what you think about my video structure idea here. I'm thinking one video to show you how to model something out in Fusion 360 or SketchUp. And in the next video, I'll build the thing that we modeled out. I don't know. Let me know. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you. See you in the next one.